Welcome back to Chess Tactic today. In round 1 of Legends and Prodigies 2025, we've got Spanish Grandmaster Jose Fernando Cuenca Jimenez facing off against Faustino Oro, the Argentinian prodigy making waves in the chess world. The game takes off in a queen's gambit structure, but very quickly it turns into a sharp battle with early queen trades and heavy piece maneuvering. Both players push pawns aggressively, knights jump into the fray, and the tension builds as attacks form on both flanks. This one is all about precision and nerve. Let's see how it unfolds. And we're off. White opens with the queen's pawn to d4, a classic move aiming for solid central control from the get-go. Black responds in kind with pawn to d5, creating a symmetrical and robust structure. No surprises yet, as both players are laying the foundation for the battle ahead. Here comes the queen's gambit. White immediately challenges Black's central pawn, asking the question, are you going to defend, capture, or create your own tension? Black chooses the queen's gambit declined, a very solid and respected response. This move shores up the d5 pawn and prepares to develop the kingside pieces. White develops the knight to c3, adding pressure on the center and preparing to control the e4 square. Everything is proceeding along very classical lines. And now Black plays pawn to c6, entering the Semi-Slav defense. This creates an incredibly solid pawn triangle in the center and prepares to potentially fight for control of the d5 square with the queen. Whoa! A sharp choice from White. Instead of a slow build-up, White immediately strikes in the center with pawn to e4. This is a bold attempt to blow the game open and punish Black's solid but slightly passive setup. Black accepts the challenge, pawn takes pawn on e4. This simplifies the central tension for now, but the game is about to enter a more open and tactical phase. Knight recaptures on e4. White now has a strong knight planted right in the heart of the board. The question is, can Black challenge it effectively? A very logical move. Black develops the knight to d7, preparing to challenge White's central knight with ngf6 without allowing any annoying pins. White continues with natural development, knight to f3, controlling key squares and preparing to castle the king to safety. And there it is, knight to f6. Black immediately challenges that strong central knight on e4, looking to trade it off and neutralize White's primary advantage. White obliges. Knight takes knight on f6. This trade eases the immediate tension and steers the game towards a more strategic positional battle. Black recaptures with the knight, maintaining a solid and balanced position. The game is still very much in the early stages, but the character is now set. It's going to be a long strategic fight. White develops the bishop to e2. A quiet but important move that prepares to castle kingside and connects the rooks. An interesting little check with bishop to b4. This forces White to respond, and Black is hoping to disrupt White's coordination just a little bit before committing to a plan. White simply blocks the check with bishop to d2, offering a trade. This is often the best way to deal with these kinds of checks. Keep it simple. Black declines the bishop trade for now, and instead develops the queen to f5. This move puts pressure on the c3 knight and keeps an eye on White's queen side. White gets the king to safety, castling kingside. A very important step, as it connects the rooks and prepares to bring them into the game. Now Black decides to trade. Bishop takes bishop on d2. This is a significant decision. Black is trading off the bishop pair to simplify the position. This suggests Black is very confident in an endgame. Queen recaptures on d2. White's queen is now centralized, but Black has a plan in mind. And there's the follow-up. Queen takes queen on d2. We have a massive liquidation, and the queens are coming off the board. The game is heading into an endgame much earlier than expected. Knight recaptures on d2. The dust has settled, and we're in a pure endgame. Both sides have equal material, but the strategic battle is just beginning. Now this is a fascinating move you don't see every day. Instead of castling, Black plays king to e7. In an endgame, the king is a fighting piece, and by bringing it to the center, Black prepares to connect the rooks and play an active role in the game. a sign of deep understanding from the young prodigy. White repositions the knight to f3, a flexible square from where it can jump to various key locations. A calm maneuvering phase of the game has begun. Black activates the rook, bringing it to the d-file. This is a key open file, and both players will fight for control of it. White mirrors the idea, playing rook to d1. The battle for the d-file is officially on. This is like a strategic tug-of-war. A subtle but useful knight maneuver to d7. It prepares to support the b6 pawn push and keeps an eye on the queen side. White brings the other rook into the game, placing it on c1. The plan is becoming clear. White wants to generate pressure on the queen side, specifically targeting the c-file. In response, Black plays pawn to b6. This prepares to fianchetto the bishop to b7, where it will control key diagonals and solidify the queen side. And here comes the action. White plays pawn to c5, trying to break open the queen side and create a weakness in Black's pawn structure. This is the first major pawn break of the endgame. Black calmly develops the bishop to b7. It now stares down the long diagonal, adding a powerful defensive and offensive piece to Black's setup. White builds up the pressure with rook to c3. The idea is to double or even triple the major pieces on the c-file, a classic endgame strategy. Black reroutes the knight to f6. This knight is heading for the juicy d5 square, where it will become a monster outpost. A creative rook swing. Rook to a3 puts pressure on the a7 pawn and restricts Black's queenside. White is playing with a lot of purpose here, and the knight lands on d5, exactly as planned. This is a fantastic central outpost for Black, challenging White's control and blockading the d-file. White counters with a strong knight of his own, knight to e5. Now both players have a powerful knight planted in the opponent's territory. The tension is rising. Black solidifies the queenside with pawn to b5. This blunts the attack of the rook on a3 and secures the c6 square. A quiet but clever move. Bishop to f1 prepares to challenge Black's knight on d5 by potentially playing g4 followed by f3. Black wastes no time, immediately kicking the white knight with pawn to f6. This is a direct challenge, forcing White's hand. What a surprising move. Instead of retreating, White swings the rook over to g3. This creates a subtle threat against the g7 pawn and keeps the pressure on. It's not the engine's top choice, but it's incredibly tricky. Black correctly calls the bluff, playing pawn to g6 to defend against any threats. A very cool-headed response under pressure. The white knight finally retreats to d3. From here, it can support the queenside and potentially reroute to c1 or f2. Black improves the king's position, moving it to f7. The king continues to be an active participant, getting out of the way of the rooks. Another rook swing from White. Rook to g4 continues to probe the kingside, trying to find a weak point in Black's armor. Black prepares to double rooks on the d-file, playing rook to d7. A very solid and strategic idea. White activates the other rook, moving it to e1. This prepares to contest the e-file or swing over to the d-file if needed. And there it is. Black doubles the rooks on the d-file. This is a classic idea you can use in your own games. Seize an open file and dominate it with your heavy pieces. The white rook continues its journey, landing on h4. Now it's putting pressure on the h7 pawn. White is fighting hard on the kingside. Black is not intimidated, pushing the pawn to h5. This blocks the rook's attack and grabs more space on the kingside. White switches plans, bringing the rook all the way back to e4 to put pressure on the e6 pawn. A very flexible use of the rook. Black's knight drops back to c7. This is a multi-purpose move. It defends the e6 pawn and prepares to jump to a more active square. White's knight hops back into the action at f4, renewing the pressure on e6 and eyeing the g6 pawn. White is not giving Black a moment's rest. Black defends calmly. Rook to e7, a simple and effective way to parry the threat. The position remains balanced, but something is brewing. White's knight retreats once again to d3. It seems white is running out of ways to increase the pressure and is repositioning for a different plan. And now, black strikes. Pawn to g5 is a bold, space-grabbing move that kicks the white knight and prepares to create kingside counterplay. The momentum is starting to shift. White responds with a counterpunch, pawn to h4, challenging black's kingside expansion. A critical moment is approaching. Boom! This is the move that changes everything. Pawn to f5. Black is not just defending, he is launching a powerful counterattack. This move attacks the rook, cracks open the center, and completely seizes the initiative. A fantastic display of aggression from black. The white rook is forced to retreat to e3. White's carefully constructed pressure has suddenly evaporated, and now it's black who is in the driver's seat. Black captures the pawn on h4, shattering white's kingside pawn structure and opening up the g-file for his rook. The attack is gaining momentum. White gets a check-in with knight to e5. This knight is a monster, but is it enough to stop black's growing threats? Black king calmly steps to f6. Notice how active this king has been all game. It's now a key attacking piece, ready to support the final assault. White tries to consolidate with rook to d1, defending the d-file, but black's pieces are coiled like a spring, ready to unleash. A brilliant knight reroute. Knight to a6 looks strange, but it's heading for the b4 square, from where it will create devastating threats on the queen side. White's bishop moves to e2, trying to create some counter threats against the black pawns on the king side. Black brings the rook to the open g-file, targeting the g2 pawn. The pressure is mounting from all sides now. White's bishop moves to f3, a better defensive square. White is in full survival mode, trying to hold the position together. And the knight arrives, knight to b4, and suddenly the c2 pawn is under immense pressure. Black's attack is perfectly coordinated. White's bishop shuffles back to e2. It's clear white is struggling to find a good plan here, just reacting to black's moves. The knight continues its incredible journey to c2, forking the white rooks on d1 and e2. A beautiful tactical shot. White moves the rook to d3, saving it from the fork. But the damage is done. Black's pieces are swarming all over the board. Just relentless pressure. Black pushes the h-pawn to h3, tearing open the shelter around the white king. This is a classic diversionary tactic. White is forced to play g3, creating more weaknesses around the king. The position is on the verge of collapse. And black pushes again with h4. This pawn is a battering ram, and white's king is feeling very exposed. The white king is forced to step into the line of fire at h2, a very dangerous place to be. Pawn takes pawn on g3 with check. The final barriers in front of the white king are being demolished. White recaptures with the f-pawn. The king side is now completely open, but look what black has cooked up in the center. This is it, the moment of pure genius. Rook takes pawn on d4, a thunderous exchange sacrifice that shatters white's entire position. Black gives up a rook for a bishop, but in return he eliminates white's best defender and opens up the floodgates. What a stunning, decisive blow. White has no choice but to recapture. Rook takes rook on d4. But now, black's pieces are ready for the final act. Knight recaptures on d4. Black now has a powerful knight in the center, a passed pawn, and white's king is desperately weak. White finds a tricky check with knight to g4, a last-ditch attempt to create chaos. But black is in complete control. Pawn takes knight on g4. Black eliminates the annoying knight and prepares to bring the rook into the attack. White's rook recaptures on d4. It's now a rook against a bishop and two pawns, but black's passed pawn is the real story. Black pushes the e-pawn to e5, kicking the rook and creating a path for the king to join the attack. White's rook captures the pawn on g4. White is trying to create some counterplay, but it's too little too late. Black's rook swings to d7, preparing to come to d2 and deliver the final blows. A picture of perfect coordination. The white rook retreats to e4, desperately trying to set up a defense. But the black pieces are closing in, and the rook lands on d2, a dagger in the heart of white's position. It attacks the b2 pawn and paralyzes white's king. White's king captures the pawn on h3. It's a free pawn, but it takes the king even further from the decisive action on the queen side. Black's rook grabs the pawn on b2. Now the path is clear for the a-pawn to march down the board. White pushes the a-pawn, a desperate attempt to create a pass pawn of his own, but black is much faster. Black simply captures the pawn. Now black has a passed pawn, and this is the game winner. The race is on! White's bishop moves to g4, trying to create some threats, but it's a futile gesture. All eyes are on that pawn. A beautiful move. Bishop to a6 not only prepares to support the pawn's advance, but also cuts off the white king. White's bishop attacks the b5 pawn, but this is a distraction. Black has a one-track mind. The bishop moves to b5, protecting the pawn and improving its position. Everything is in place for the final push. White's rook shifts to e3, but it's powerless to stop the inevitable. Black's rook attacks the white rook on e3, forcing a trade or a retreat. This simplifies the position further into a winning one. The rook retreats to e1, and now the star of the show makes its move. There it is. The pawn marches to a 3. This pawn is an unstoppable force, a freight train heading for the promotion square. White has no way to stop it now. What a masterful conversion. The white rook rushes to a 1, a desperate attempt to blockade the pawn, but black has a simple and elegant solution. Black's rook moves to d3. The plan is simple. Bring the rook to a 3, force the trade, and the pawn will queen. It's over. A final hopeless move from white's bishop. There is nothing to be done. Black's bishop moves to c4, tightening the noose and leaving white with no useful moves. The white king moves to h4, a spectator to the execution on the other side of the board. And pawn to a 2. The pawn is just one step away from becoming a queen. At this point, white resigns the game. White makes one last move with bishop to d1, but after rook to d2, it's all over. Black has completely outplayed his opponent from a seemingly equal endgame. What a phenomenal game! We witnessed a quiet opening explode into a tactical masterpiece, capped off by a brilliant exchange sacrifice from Faustino Oro. This was a stunning display of strategic depth and attacking flair. Thanks for joining us on Chess Tactic today, and we'll see you for the next one.